Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to talk about ways of preserving your eggs, different ways of preserving it, and towards the end I'll be talking and showing my personal favorite way of preserving the eggs from my own chickens for long-term storage. So whatever method you choose is going to be entirely based on what is best for you, how you plan on using your eggs, and even your climate. So let's start with one old-fashioned method that you'll often hear talked about, and that's the water glass method. Now, what some people may not understand is the name has nothing to do with water in a glass. What water glass is or means, it's just a common name for sodium silicate, which is what is used in doing the water glass method. Now, I personally have never done it. I don't have any videos showing how, but there are several out there on YouTube that are doing it. I know of one for certain that she, I believe, was using the slacked lime, even though it technically wouldn't be called the water glass method. It's the same idea. It's just that the true water glass method uses sodium silicate. Now, I'll link to a video I did see on this a few years ago that's really well done, and I'll put that in the description box down below. If I remember, if I forget, just remind me to get it and put it in there. Even though that method has been used for many decades at least, if not much longer, the reason why I've shied away from those, using either one of those, is both of those can be harmful, toxic if swallowed, inhaled, or even come in contact with your skin, in particular the sodium silicate. I think if I was going to do this, I'd lean more towards lime. It's not quite as toxic and dangerous as the sodium silicate, but still has its own issues. So with that, the thing that concerned me is knowing that eggs are permeable, egg shells, I was concerned about how much of that actually leaches into the egg itself. And plus, being one that likes to recycle the eggshells anyway, I would prefer not to have the eggshells loaded with toxins because I take those internally. But if you're going to use that method, I remember one time, I don't remember what video or where it was I read about it, is someone said you should wash your eggs first. Well, to me that doesn't make sense. You shouldn't wash your eggs first, because keeping that bloom on there is going to help prevent the toxins from getting into your eggs anyway. I don't know how much though when sitting in there for months, but from what I understand, it can preserve the eggs for a year or so. Now, I've known people who've tried it, weren't really happy with the results after several months. One person shared that it made the eggs very watery, but again, I think some of these things can depend on maybe the amounts you're using, where you're actually storing it, and so on. So please, any of the methods that you use and you've tried, go ahead and share with us down below so people can learn from you as well, since some of these I'm mentioning I've never personally tried, but I want to make sure I get the different ideas out there so people can look into it for themselves. But having those who are experienced with working in these different ways commenting down below, then people can read those and compare and get some ideas of what they think is going to work best for them. You still may find yourself having to experiment with a few different ways. Now, some other popular methods are dehydrating. Now, I've seen it done a couple of different ways. Some people say when it comes to dehydrating the eggs, you have to cook them first, which means you got to scramble them up, dehydrate them, and then they're only going to be good for using as a scrambled egg in omelets and making quiche and that kind of thing when you go to rehydrate them. But I do know years ago, I watched a video by Bev Volfe over at our Half Acre Homestead, and if I can find that video, I'll link to it down below, where if I remember correctly, she was dehydrating with a dehydrator, much like mine, maybe the same one, raw eggs. Being able to dehydrate them raw means that they're going to have a lot more use once you go to rehydrate them, because they can be used for making cakes and various other things as well. So I'll try to find that video and link to it down below. And then there's also freeze drying. So if you're one that has invested in a freeze dryer, that's going to be a much better method for drying your eggs. Now, what I did do years ago before we first got our chickens was, even though I've never actually tried these particular ones, I did stock up on the Honeyville Ova Easy, it's called Ova Easy egg crystals. And so these were freeze dried in their raw form. Before I got these, I didn't realize there was two different ones, and I got the dehydrated ones. And again, those are only something that's good for using in scrambled eggs. And yes, I did work with them. I found it best to kind of use them more as a way to supplement the eggs I was already doing it. So maybe if I was cooking up 2 eggs, I would take 1 fresh egg and then mix in there a little water and then some of the dehydrated egg powder in there. And that way I just doubled the egg content. And that seemed to work better than just making the scrambled eggs just from the powder itself. It seemed to taste better that way. But I've never actually tried the egg crystals. These are very expensive because there's a lot of eggs in there. I remember at the time when I bought these, Honeyville was a lot less expensive than it is now. But what I came up with price-wise was about the same price I would pay at our local store per dozen for eggs. And I just wanted to have some eggs in storage in case we never got our chickens, or when we did get our chickens, maybe something happened to them and we were at some kind of downtime and I needed some eggs as backup, whatever. So for those who don't have chickens, that may be an option of looking at. You can check out Honeyville. I think there's probably other places you may be able to, maybe Augustin Farms, maybe some other ones that have the egg crystals. You want to make sure you know which ones. You're not just regular dehydrated scrambled eggs, but actual raw egg that was freeze dried. That's what you're going to want to go with, because it's going to be more expensive, but it's going to be more versatile than your standard dehydrated eggs, unless you do them Bev Wolfe style. The other thing you can do, especially if you live in a naturally cooler climate, is simply do not wash your eggs. Just store them in cartons and put them in the coldest area of your home, and they will last for many months without having to actually refrigerate them. But you're still going to want to keep them in the coolest place you can. So if you live in a very warm climate that stays very warm all year round, and you don't have a root cellar, might have a room with a closet somewhere. Closets are usually the place that gets the least amount of heat, where you can put your eggs and store them in there. That may work. I cannot guarantee the length of time. It's going to vary depending on how hot your area gets, your home gets, and so on. Now let's move on to the way that I personally like to preserve my eggs, and that is through freezing. Now I've tried several different methods. Even in freezing, there's several different ways to do it. One thing I have not done is tried to freeze them whole. I should do that with at least 1 egg just to kind of test the consistency for myself. But some people have shared that by doing that, by freezing the egg whole in a single forms like in ice trays, the egg yolk, once thawed out, tends to be very tough, takes on a very odd consistency. Again, I haven't experienced that myself, but I've heard that from several different people that have tried freezing the eggs without scrambling them first. So I've always scrambled them, but most of the ways that I'm going to use my eggs, I'm going to need them scrambled anyway. That would be using and making homemade mayonnaise, making cakes, anything that I need eggs in there, quick breads and so on. Scramblers and omelets, all that kind of stuff. So I always freeze my eggs in 2s. Now, when I first started doing this, I was trying it, that was back when my food saver was still working, and I was cutting, using recycled food saver bags and cutting them into small pieces, and then seal them up into tiny little bags, and then vacuum sealing them into those. And those actually, that worked really good, at least until my vacuum sealer stopped working. And so then the next year, I decided to go with somebody else's suggestion, and that is using the breast milk bags, because they're, you know, they're food safe, BPA free, blah, blah, blah. And those did work pretty good. As you can see right here, here's some that I just took out of the freezer. So if you're going to use either of these methods, any kind of form of freezing into a bag, you want to make sure that after you fill up your bag, you lay them flat in the freezer, like on a cookie sheet or any flat surface. And then you can stand them up this way or even this way, however you want once they're frozen. So you can see in this picture right here how I have a lot of them stacked up upright like this. Some are laying flat, but most of them are stacked like this. Now these eggs are from 2019. Now the first time when I was using the food saver bags, I found that the eggs, I used them right during that next year, and they were just fine. But with these ones, even though they're still great for breads and making mayonnaise and so on, I don't know if it's because they've been sitting in there for 2 years because I never needed to use them last winter, or if it's the bags themselves, maybe it didn't preserve them as well. But either way, the flavor and the texture is a little bit odd for using to make scrambled eggs or omelets, scramblers, that kind of thing, for eating like that. I'm still using them up. I'm trying to work through them, but I'm saving that for things I need eggs in, such as making pancakes like I did yesterday morning. Now, before I get on to talking about how I'm freezing the eggs this year and what I'm doing differently, I want to show you the easiest way, at least I found, for filling bags, whether it be making little tiny narrow food saver bags or using bags like this. So this little contraption, even though I'm not one big into kitchen gadgets, I had a subscriber that sent me this a couple years ago. And at first I was like, I'm not really sure how I'm going to use this. Well, when it came to filling the egg bags, I found this to be very helpful. So I'll go ahead and link, I think these come in a set of 2, so I'll go ahead and link to them down below. And what they are is they're made specifically for holding bags, any kind of bags. And so you can extend it if the bag's taller or bigger, or you can leave it down here. And so what I do, this is actually one that had eggs in it that I cleaned up. And I'm gonna try recycling them that too. That's the other thing, as I wanted to try to reuse them, so I'd have to take the writing off of there. So anyway, you just slide the top end of your bag underneath these little clips here, like that. What that does then is it holds the bag open. So then what I do is I simply take, I'm gonna start with this egg because I found it had a crack in it. I must have cracked it against something when I was gathering the eggs up. Break a couple eggs into here, and then I just take my fork. I like using a measuring cup like this, and then blend it really well. I find these salad forks to be the perfect size for doing this, so I use salad forks a lot for mixing. You do want to make sure it's very well blended. And then what you do is you just leave this sitting on your counter, and then you'll just pour this into there, and that makes it a little more hands-free and easier to use. I found it best to go ahead and fold these edges over, that way it will hold and stay better when you do that. It's been a couple years since I did this last time. And then now that that's held open, it makes it easy for me to just pour that right into the bag. Let me get a little silicone spatula out. So I'll just do at least one of these for now, and then I'm going to go on to showing you how the method I'm using this year. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some rubbing alcohol and take that lettering off there, at least a year. You can freeze as many as you want. I like doing 2 at a time because that just seems to be perfect. So trying to squish out all the air you can. In fact, you can sort of squish it around like this, work your air bubbles out. Because the more air pockets you can get out of there, the less likely you're going to have issues with it burning in the freezer. And then just ziplock it tightly, and then keep it flat like that when you're freezing it. Okay, so now I'm going to do this again. All right, so what I have here is a little 1/4 pint jar. I'm going to dump these in here, and I've already done this once to test it out to make sure this is going to work. And just like I thought, the 2 scrambled eggs fill the jar up perfectly. Now, you have a couple of options when you go to freeze this, how you're going to do it. Normally, when I'm freezing anything liquid in jars, I will simply set the lid on and put it in the freezer like that, and allow the ingredients on the inside to expand before I go put a band and tighten it down. However, considering the fact that the scrambled eggs I know have a lot of little air bubbles in there, and the jar is smaller, I decided to try doing something different with just 1 jar to make sure it was going to work. Because the smaller your jar is, the less likely it is going to break on you. That's why it's a good idea to never freeze in 1/2 gallon jars. I only go up to quart jars when I'm freezing. So what I did yesterday, when I gave this a try, was I went ahead and vacuum sealed it to prevent any kind of freezer burn, to get the longest life out of my eggs, and being able to recycle the jars and use them over and over again is going to also save money. And I wasn't sure if vacuum sealing it would cause the egg to come up under it, but it didn't. And then what I did was I put the band on loosely just in case it does expand. I put it on very loose and then froze it, because that way if it expands, if you leave this loose enough, it can actually push that lid up and still prevent it from breaking your jars. And here's the jar that I froze up yesterday. The lid is still on tight. I was surprised to find it didn't lose its seal, because sometimes when I've frozen things, I've tried to vacuum seal things and then freeze it, it ended up losing its seal in the freezer, even though it wasn't liquid, even though it had plenty of airspace in there. And so this froze up beautifully. There's no cracks in the jar. It looks great. So I think this is going to be a very viable method. I'm still going to only do one more jar for now, and I'm still not tightening the lid down super tight. I'm just putting it on about as tight as you would if you're using a Tatler lid or using your vacuum chamber. So if you decide this method is going to work, with your vacuum chamber, you could actually stack several of these jars on top of each other. And in that case, you are going to put the band on loosely, like I did here, and then stack them up and then vacuum sealing it. Now, I haven't tried that yet because I only want to do a couple more jars. I still want to make sure that one wasn't a fluke and just happened to come out okay. I'll do one more, and if any of these break, then what I'm going to do is how I described it before, where I'm just going to put the lid on loosely, give it space for expansion, and then go back and then put the band on and tighten it down a little bit. So I think this will be a very good method, and I think it will not only preserve them better in the freezer, but help keep the flavor nicer, and also being able to get away from the plastic altogether. The downside to this though is it's going to take up more room in your freezer and be a little more tricky to find the best places to put it where they're not going to fall over or crack. These ones I won't bother wrapping in cloth because they are small, and where I plan on storing them is going to be the same place where I store my snow peas, and I don't wrap those either. But any place where you're going to store them where they could possibly knock against each other because you're moving stuff around, then I recommend wrapping some fabric around them, like you can see in this picture here with one of my quart jars. Oh, and one more method I did want to mention I like to do with my excess eggs. Now, this isn't something I recommend for long-term storage, but this is something where if you got a lot of eggs coming in, and to me it's just a special treat, I love to ferment my eggs. It's not the same as pickled eggs. Pickled eggs are something you're going to do with vinegar, so they're going to taste pickled like you would think. They're going to have a sour flavor, whereas the fermented eggs just taste like a hard-boiled egg, except for they have that little bit of fizziness to them while you're eating them, and I love them. And so I have a couple different videos on that. I have one that's a short, that's just because it's a very simple method, but I also have other ones where I break it down, show you some different ideas, and that involves using the fermentation starter, a little salt, and whatever herbs and spices you want in that. And so I'll be doing that here soon because, again, I just love fermented eggs. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, that it gave you a few ideas. Don't forget to read the comments down below, or put your comment down below and share with us your favorite way of preserving eggs for long term. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.